Yes, I understand. Take care of him or take care of him? Take care of him. Okay, got it. I gotta go. Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing Secret Agent Man by Conrad Hilton. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo. In the interests of full disclosure, I have to admit that, yes, Joseph Conrad is my great-great-uncle. We are supposedly relatives. So, in a way, I feel bad about reviewing his book because it's nepotism. But in another way, that could just be a family myth. I don't really know. But, that being said, I'm going to tell you that I loved this book. Just like I have loved, I think, every one of Conrad's books that I read. Nostromo, which was also on this list, but I'm not reviewing it because I already reviewed, or rather, I already read it, so I'm not reading it this year. But that was one of the greatest books I've ever read. Heart of Darkness was pretty good. Lord Jim was a really good book. I think Conrad is just a brilliant writer. And I've been thinking about it, and I'm actually glad I read this text. And we'll talk about this book in a little while. But whatever version this is, I wish I could tell you. Okay, it's the Barnes & Noble's Classic. Now, at first, it had a lot of footnotes that sort of pissed me off. Because some of them were things like, agent provocateur. And I'm like, I know what a fucking agent provocateur is. I know it's, a French word, but it's like saying, I don't know, comme ci, comme ça. Like, I don't know what that means. But anyway, that being said, at first I was a little irritated, but as it went on, I started to notice that a lot of the things that they annotated as worthy of a footnote was something that Conrad had translated a phrase, and it was still like an apropos phrase, but it wasn't an English phrase. It was like a French phrase or a Polish phrase, being as one of our greatest English language writers, English was his third language. So a lot of his phraseology is foreign. And a lot of his syntax is foreign. Which I think is part of what makes him such a brilliant writer. Like, how could you or I come to write a book in our first language the same way that he could with his third? I mean, I certainly think that contributed to it. I think a lot of what makes Conrad great is that he's Polish as well. I don't know if you could tell I'm also Polish. Because the Poles, being an oppressed minority in Europe, at a time when most of the European empires were oppressing minorities in what we would today call the developing or third world, Conrad, when he became a British citizen, had an entirely different view of the great, the sun never sets on the Union Jack. He actually kind of sympathized with the people that the British were oppressing, which was really novel at this time. Now, all that being said, I've just kind of pissed away like 4 minutes just talking about Conrad as a guy and how great he is. But this is a book. Let's talk about the book now. All that is part and parcel of this book. Like, the writing, it's just like writing you could just like take a bite out of, and like just. I think somebody once said that his paragraphs are like waves. They just don't stop. They just keep hitting you. But all that is precursor. Sorry, I know it's almost 5 minutes into the video now. This book is the first Conrad book I read that takes place in Britain. And there's no travel at all. And, forgive my ignorance or whatever, but I kind of thought of Conrad as kind of solely a seafaring, adventuring, nautical, swashbuckling kind of writer. The Secret Agent takes place entirely, I think, in London. And my only complaint about this book, and it's a complaint that all Conrad books, and frankly a lot of 19th century books in general share, which is that they put all the exposition up front. Okay? So for a short little novel like The Secret Agent, that's fine. It was like 10 or 20 pages of just like, and he lived on 1415 this street and blah, blah, blah. Modern audience, I guess the Victorian, if it's still right to call him a Victorian author, I don't know if that's exactly the right term, but I guess the Victorian authors felt the need to do all the table setting up front, like before you got into the story, whereas modern audiences, we expect our table setting to be like sort of sprinkled throughout it. So I had the same problem with Nostromo. It was like a 20-page geography dissertation about Costaguana, which is a fictional country to begin with. But once I got through that first table setting, which thank God, because Secret Agent is shorter, was a little bit shorter, right away it was a really compelling book. It was very prototypical spy book. Like none of the conventions were there. I mean, I'm guessing this is one of the first books. I don't do a whole lot of research for this. I try and take the novels as they come. But I'm guessing this is one of the first spy books, and it's right there. It's like, the things that you or I would take for granted because we've seen James Bond and we've seen in like Flint, like these people are just sort of discovering, like, don't trust this guy, or this guy is clearly betraying you, or don't get married because having a spouse is going to, stab you in the chest in this case. But it was immediately gripping. And at the very end, and I say this without exaggeration, the last few scenes when, spoiler alert, whatever, Mrs. Verloc has killed her husband and she finds one of his anarchist friends and she thinks that he's the only one that can save her. Those scenes were some of the most intriguing, like, compelling. It was like reading Inglourious Basterds. You were like, what's going to happen next? Like, they're waiting for the cops to find them out. You don't know who's playing who. You don't know if she's about to turn on him. He's about to turn on her. What he's going to do. Who's going to kill who. And are they going to get caught? Are they going to get away? Do they want to get caught? Does she really have the money? It was like a modern-day thriller. It was really engrossing. One of the other great things, I'm running towards the end of, I usually try not to go over 10 or 11 minutes. I think I might with this one, though. One of the great characters in this book is a guy that they only call the Professor. And he's just this weird little guy. And all he does is he carries around a dead man switch with him all the time. And he's an anarchist, and just whenever the cops stop him or whatever, he's like, what, you ready? You ready for me to let off my dead man switch? You willing to die to, talk to me or irritate me or bother me or whatever? And he's repeatedly called the perfect anarchist. That's what the Professor's kind of like take on himself or thoughts on himself are. There's a lot of deep psychological conversations and that sort of thing in this book, but just the Professor's behavior is really sort of intriguing because he thinks he's got a lot of really perverse thoughts. I think at one point he says, who cares what the future holds? We just need to tear down what exists today, which is such a like Conrad calls him, the perfect anarchist. That is such a, perfectly encapsulated, thoughts about anarchism. I'm really going long, and I don't even feel like I'm expressing myself really well. This was a great book. There's so much stuff I didn't even get into. There's the Secret Agent himself. I don't think I even mentioned him yet. And his brother-in-law who's got some kind of a mental issue, and he ends up killing his brother-in-law because he was using him as a stooge. But also the whole time he was being used as a stooge by the Russian embassy. It was just I didn't realize it was going to take place entirely in London, but when I did, I thought it was going to be crappy because who wants to read a Conrad book that, takes place entirely in London? But it was not. It was a really great book, and all nepotism aside, 100% recommend it. Go out and get it. But actually don't read it until you've read Nostromo. I'll just throw that out there. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry I've been going on so long. Next time we're going to talk about The Good Soldier by Ford Maddox Ford.